Sand Welch just cornered AG Pam Bondi with a question that exposed the brutal reality facing American families. Healthcare premiums tripling while the government plays politics. When Welch pressed her on a Vermont family with a leukemic child facing financial ruin, Bondi's response revealed everything wrong with this administration's priorities.
Apprehension that they have is that if we don't solve this problem, and November 1 is a urgent date, then their family premiums will triple. It'll be beyond their ability to pay. So I'm assuming that with respect to the threat to health care for families in your state of Florida, in my state of Vermont, you would share that concern and hope that we would resolve that.
Senator Welch, I would be happy to speak with that family too, because there are many nonprofits that help with children with terminal illnesses, and I'm involved in some in Florida. So we would be happy to talk to you about that. As to health care, the government is shut down. It's my understanding, maybe you're not one of them, but because many Democrats want health care for illegal aliens, and that's what shut down the government.
Let me be clear.
That's one of the sticking points, and I don't know if you voted for that or not.
This actually is important to all of us, and the lament I have is that if this health care goes away, this premium support, it is really going to hurt families in red states and blue states. And in Vermont, I mean, we voted Democratic, but we have a lot of good folks who voted for President Trump, and their health care is jeopardized. And there's a November 1 deadline that is coming up. And the reason I'm saying this is that I think it's important for us to try to work out together a resolution that's going to be beneficial to people you care about in Florida and voted for President Trump, and people I care about in Vermont who voted in some cases for Vice President Harris and some for President Trump. So it's not just Democrats not wanting to negotiate. And in fact, we do want to negotiate, and that's why I'd encourage the President to encourage my colleagues on the Republican side to sit down with us and try to see if we can make some progress. Another topic, with the respect to voting rights in the letter that your voting rights chief sent out, we got one in Vermont, and it's a demand to get all the information on the voting file. And in that letter, or in the announcement of that letter, the chief indicated an apprehension about the voting process being taken over by, quote, the left. Now, do you have any information with respect to Vermont about a takeover of the voting process by, quote, the left?
Senator, I'm not familiar with what you're referring to. We are currently involved in voter roll lawsuits in 6 states. Is that what you're referring to?
No, there's a letter that went out demanding that states, including Vermont, provide all the voting file information,
right.
Includes personal information. But when that letter was sent out—
That's perfectly legal.
But there was an assertion by the chief in this division that this was to deal with the fact that the voting process has been taken over by the left. So we got one of those letters in Vermont. And my question to you is, what do you mean by the left? And do you have any evidence that the so-called system has been overtaken by the left?
We must have fair and free elections.
No, I know that. But I'm asking for the specific basis.
And we will have fair and free elections in this country. Okay, Senator, I'd be happy to talk to my chief. Who was it who said that?
It was your chief, which I assume you would know who that is. Here's the question here, okay? There is a point of view that is in dispute here about the fairness of elections. But you have the power as the as the Attorney General to use the authority of your office to make demands on states. And you did that with Vermont. That's within your right to do it. I'm not disputing your legal authority to do it.
Is Vermont disputing turning over the information to our office?
Vermont is. The Secretary of State is. and you can resolve that with her. But
And we have every right to have that information,
yeah, but here's where
Senator.
I'm going.
Why wouldn't they want to turn it
You're
over?
a prosecutor with the awesome authority to make the decision that you're going to start an investigation against the state or against an individual. And I know from your experience as a county prosecutor and as the Attorney General in Florida, you took seriously that obligation to have a factual basis before you'd proceed, right?
Senator, I take that role, I take my oath very seriously.
All right, so what I'm
and I
asking-
take fair and free elections in this
No,
country
we
very
all-
seriously.
we all
and that
do.
information, our office is entitled to have that information.
But
And we
the
are
question
involved
here-
in litigation on that, and I
Here's the
assume we'll be
question
involved
I
in
have.
litigation with
We have-
Vermont.
We have a Republican governor in Vermont. We had our former Republican governor was secretary, was the treasurer for many years, and also the secretary of state with election responsibility. What I'm asking is, do you or does your head of this voting section have any factual basis that you can point to that justifies your demand that Vermont turn over all this confidential voting rights information?
Well, it would remain confidential with my office, and you just said that you have a Republican governor, so it doesn't make sense what you just said. We've asked that of every state, Senator.
Right, and I'm asking about Vermont and what the factual basis is, but we can move on. You've mentioned that you can't discuss pending litigation, and I think the committee by and large accepted that answer. But I did notice that you spoke at great length about pending litigation, specifically with respect to the questions Senator Cruz asked you about the sentencing of the Kavanaugh defendant. That's pending, right?
He was sentenced to 8 years.
I understand that, but that's on appeal, right?
We will be appealing.
Right, so that makes it pending litigation. So you made an exception with respect to
No.
the Cruz questions.
Hold on. No,
but you
those
didn't
were-
answer
those were
any of the
things-
questions that you said were pending in litigation from any of my colleagues.
Those were facts that came out at the sentencing hearing. You're welcome to see the transcript of the sentencing hearing
I understand
with all the
that.
gruesome details of what they threatened to do to Justice Kavanaugh and other justices.
I condemn what that person did.
That was the sentencing.
But the point here is that that's pending litigation. You indicated you're going to be appealing. It's your right to do that. And you would not, you use that justification to not answer many other questions.
Justification, you're an attorney, Senator.
Okay.
You realize that.
I do want to go back to Homan. There's a tape, right, with Mr. Homan? I mean, first of all, is there a tape that has audio and video of the transfer of the $50,000?
You would have to talk to Director Patel about that.
No, I'm talking to you.
I don't know the answer, Senator.
Yet you do know the answer to that.
Don't call me a liar.
I didn't call you a liar.
You just said I know the answer. I said I don't know the answer.
Well,
you have to talk to
okay, let
Director
me-
Patel. What I said is that
Let me
investigation
put it
was
another
closed.
way. If you don't know, why don't you know whether there was a tape and video?
Senator, I believe that was resolved prior to my confirmation as Attorney General.
Do you think that it is of public interest for the people to know what happened to the $50,000 that the FBI turned over to Homan?
Did you hear what I just said? That was resolved prior to my confirmation as Attorney General. That's why I said I would not know.
It's not resolved. There's $50,000. Homan has it, or somebody has it. Do you have no interest in knowing where it is?
You're not going to sit here and slander Tom Homan. The FBI and Deputy Director Blanche said there was nothing.
I'm not slamming Tom Homan. He got the $50,000.
Tom Homan is doing, how do you know that? Tom Homan is doing a great job, as our borders are, keeping your border state safe. You're a border state.
What Senator Welch did in this exchange wasn't just political theater. It was a masterclass in exposing how intentional power deflects from human consequences. Welch opened with a concrete example: a Vermont family of 5 facing tripled health care premiums because their child has acute myeloid leukemia. When he pressed Bondi to acknowledge this crisis, her response was telling. Instead of addressing healthcare policy, She blamed Democrats and offered to connect the family with nonprofits. That deflection reveals how officials use private charity to avoid public accountability. When government policy creates a crisis, suggesting families rely on nonprofit help isn't compassion. It's abdication. The voting rights portion exposed another pattern, using legal authority without factual justification. When Welch pressed Bondi about demands for Vermont's voting files based on claims the left had taken over elections, she couldn't cite specific evidence. Her response was procedural rather than substantive. This matters because prosecutorial power, without predication, turns law enforcement into political enforcement. When the Department of Justice demands state records based on vague claims without presenting evidence, that's not protecting democracy. It's using federal authority to validate political narratives. The most revealing moment came when Welch exposed Bondi's selective application of the pending litigation standard. She refused to answer other senators' questions, citing ongoing cases, but spoke extensively about the Kavanaugh case when Senator Cruz asked. When confronted with this inconsistency, she claimed sentencing facts were public record, ignoring that the case remains on appeal. This selective transparency shows how institutional norms get weaponized. Officials invoke procedural rules when questions are uncomfortable, then abandon those rules when politics align. The exchange about missing $50,000 demonstrated how officials use ignorance as immunity. When Welch asked about federal funds, Bondi claimed lack of knowledge because it preceded her confirmation. But when pressed on whether she had interest in knowing where taxpayer money went, she defended Homan rather than addressing accountability. This pattern shows how officials avoid responsibility by claiming temporal immunity. But institutional accountability requires continuity. When agencies lose track of funds, that's not a personnel issue. It's a systemic problem. What makes this exchange significant isn't partisan politics. It's the demonstration of how power deflects accountability through procedure, charity, ignorance, and selective rule application. Welch pressed for factual specificity about healthcare consequences, voting rights justifications, and financial accountability. In each case, Bondi avoided direct answers in favor of talking points and deflection. The healthcare crisis won't disappear because officials suggest nonprofit solutions. Voting rights investigations won't become legitimate through legal authority alone, and missing federal funds don't become acceptable because current officials weren't present when they disappeared. These are institutional problems requiring institutional solutions, not personal deflections.